Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Snap Fantasy Football Podcast. I am your host, as always, Lando, and I'm here to go through the Houston Texans wide receiving core. I got a lot of requests on Twitter about that, and if you're on Twitter, hit me up. I'm Lando_FF. If you have any ideas for a segment, any ideas on really hard questions on which receiving core or backfield you are having trouble kind of pushing that draft button on. I know all your drafts are coming up really soon, so these segments are more important than ever. So this segment is about how my process is, how I go about evaluating players, where I'm willing to draft them, what kind of projections I have for them for that season, and kind of my temperature, hot, cold, indifferent, if they're going to be on my teams or not. So We'll kick this off and go through. There's a lot to go through here, so we'll see if we can keep it under that 15-minute mark. But Houston is a very interesting team. Obviously, they traded away Mr. DeAndre Hopkins, and now they have two wide receivers that are getting drafted fairly high, around that mid-7th round, almost back-to-back, and that's Brandon Cooks and Will Fuller. So they have a lot of question marks. They're both very injury-prone, in the sense that Brandon Cooks has had concussions. He's a lot of people are saying one concussion away from ending his career. He had two missed games in 2018, and he really had a really bad year, where Will Fuller has core muscle tear last year. He had a hamstring strain last year, ACL tear in 2018, another hamstring strain, so that soft muscle tissue is the issue for Will Fuller. So right away there's a inherent injury risk, but we know there's a ton of opportunities to be had in Houston. So I'm going to kind of weigh the risk and reward for these two players. According to Player Profiler, which I highly suggest you guys going to, Will Fuller has a 63.5% injury probability. That's number 7 in the NFL. Brandon Cooks has a 61.7% injury probability, and that is 12 in the NFL. So both are going to have some risk, and in the 7th round, you got to decide if you're really willing to take that risk. If they're right around the 704, to me, I think in most of your leagues, I don't know which one goes later. Probably Brandon Cooks, because the perceived injury risk is a little bit higher. But again, he's that name that people recognize in your home leagues. They might jump in and take him in the 6th round or so. Because really, and I'll look at it now, before last year, he had a 1,200-yard season with the Rams. He was with New England, had 1,000 yards. He was with the New Orleans Saints, had 1,100 yards 2 years in a row. So this guy has been the epitome of consistent. But his high was only around 20, just over 25 points was his actual game high for fantasy points in the past 4 or 5 years, since 2015. He hasn't been that boom guy, but he's had a lot of 100-point games. He's kind of that streaker. He's super fast. Where Will Fuller, on the other hand, is kind of that complete opposite. This guy is crazy. He will go out and score you. Last year against Atlanta, he scored 45 points for you, 3 touchdowns in one game, but that was the only touchdown he scored all year round. Those 3 in one game, which is absolutely crazy. And the one thing I like about Will Fuller is his upside with DeShaun Watson, because they have the chemistry already built in. And that will, at least, because there's not much else there. They have everything new. They had David Johnson in the backfield, and then these 2 new wide receivers. That's something that people will look at and be like, well, they have a chemistry built in. He's going to go to their go-to guy, Will Fuller. He was in history with DeShaun Watson, one of the most efficient wide receivers in the NFL. Almost every pass he caught seemed to have been a touchdown. It was crazy. But again, his injury concerns have kept him off the field. So he's really that boom bust guy. For me, Will Fuller is a great pick in best ball leagues where you don't have to decide when to start him. But we've seen in plus matchups, he's a very good start. Brandon Cooks, unfortunately, left one of the highest passing offenses in the league and now goes to Houston, which they have absolutely an all-star quarterback. And I'm going to go over DeShaun Watson because my projections on DeShaun Watson should ideally have a massive effect on their wide receiving core. So in the past 2 years, he's thrown for over 500 attempts. So it's a very safe bet that he throws for another 500 attempts. That's a very standard projection for DeShaun Watson. In a lot of people's leagues, he's going to be a top 4 or top 3 fantasy quarterback in the league, whether it's Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and then it's going to be it's a mid-second tier with DeShaun Watson, Dak Prescott, and Kyler Murray, Russell Wilson. They're kind of jumbled up in that tier. So it's definitely not outlandish to have him between 25 and 35 touchdowns for the season. That's completely normal for a quarterback of his caliber, and so that just really means that there's going to be tons of fantasy points to be had. It's just which one do we want to go to. I personally am not a fan of David Johnson. Now, the Houston Texans traded for him, and he just really looked slow to me. He didn't look like he had it anymore, but he's a better receiver out of the backfield than he is a running back, in my opinion. And they also have Duke Johnson there. So those two running backs are really good pass catchers and should take away targets from the wide receiver core. Houston doesn't have any tight ends to really write home about. Darren Fells is there. Jordan Akins is there. Both are going to be okay. It's going to be hard to decide where you want to start them if you are starting him. But there's so many tight ends this year that both of those tight ends are probably going to be undrafted in your fantasy leagues. Out of anyone on that team, the most owned player for me out of that backfield or out of that whole team is probably going to be Duke Johnson. I think he has a chance to share the work or take more of the workload out of David Johnson's hands. That might be an unpopular opinion. I know a lot of people are really big on the narrative that Houston traded DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson. He still has lots. They're going to run him into the ground. They're going to prove that it was not a bad trade for the Houston Texans. Now, regardless of what you think, I don't know. I'm just not really buying into that narrative. The Texans offensive line is still not great. So it's going to be a lot of DeShaun Watson under pressure. It's going to be a lot of DeShaun Watson making things happen. And who's going to be that recipient? If I was on the clock in the mid-7th round, I'm going to take Will Fuller. I'm going to take the boom bust guy. I'm going to take the guy that can get me 35 points in a week and the issues in the core, soft muscle issues at least, is something that there's a time frame on, where if it's Brandon Cooks' 4th or 5th concussion, he might be done. He might be completely done. So both the guys are high risk. So I'm just going to take the guy with the higher ceiling. That's my process. For if I'm looking at projections for Will Fuller, I'm going to look at so his touchdowns, I have to assume that he's going to be on the field for those 16 games for your fantasy team. And I think he probably has between 60 and 70 receptions, 900 yards, 6 touchdowns, 1 rush attempt, maybe 1 or 2 rush attempts. Rush attempts are really irrelevant for Will Fuller, but he could easily catch 8 or 9 touchdowns. It's possible. So that's kind of where, and it's always going to be deep touchdowns. He's going to be a guy that he will accrue value, especially if he has that big. He's going to have a 35, 40-point game. We know that. And then if you feel uncomfortable with Will Fuller, you have that chance to sell him. So I think that's where I lead. Now I'm going to look through some of my advanced metrics to go through if my original kind of opinion kind of backs that up with what I'm kind of saying, basically. So Will Fuller caught 69.4% of targets, and Brandon Cooks caught only 57%. So this was a really off year for Brandon Cooks. Alignment data doesn't really matter. I'm going to look at some advanced metrics and contested catches for these guys. Brandon Cooks had a 70% success rate versus contested catches. That's really good. We know he's a talented wide receiver. He can catch the ball well. It's just he wasn't getting targeted in that LA Rams offense as much as we would want for him to be a fantasy viable player. Where Will Fuller, really good wide receiver, obviously. I was shocked how high this number is. An 84.6 contested catch rate, and 21% of his passes were contested. So he came down with a lot of contested catches. One of the tops in the NFL. He is top 7 in the NFL with success rate. Only guys like DJ Moore, Michael Thomas, Al Robinson, Cortland Sutton, those guys are just finished a little bit higher ahead of Will Fuller, which is phenomenal. Now, Will Fuller's not the biggest guy, so he didn't really break any tackles. I guess that's to be that's not a shocking to be expected is what I was trying to say. Not great for broken tackles. I don't expect Brandon Cooks to either have, he didn't break many tackles either. So both these guys aren't the yards really after contact guy. They go down on first contact, which also lends it to be, not great. They're going to rely on these maybe longer depth of targets, and they fall right down. So unless they're in the end zone, that's not going to do you too much. It's not a guy like an A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf, the young, strong guys that are going to break a ton of tackles. Deebo Samuel last year had a really good yards after catch kind of stats. So we'll go there. I'm gonna look at a little bit more stats here, and we can kind of say that Will Fuller was doubled only 3 times, but a 66% success rate. He only had a 72% success versus zone. He ran 106 routes versus zone. Where if we look at Brandon Cooks, not great across the board. He ran 144 routes versus zone and only a 76.4% success rate. He was doubled 7 times and had a 42% success rate. So neither guys showed out much last year. So if you believe in Brandon Cooks of those several 5 years in a row with 1,000 more yards, you're going to have to kind of throw last year out. You're going to have to throw it out and say, you know what, I believe in the talent. I hope he doesn't get concussed again and doesn't get injured. But that one is a really tough one for me. So I'm generally going to stay away from Brandon Cooks. If he stays healthy for the season, he's going to go for the 1,000 yards. He's going to go for more yards than Will Fuller. I think I'd project him for closer to 5 to 6 touchdowns. But I can check here on what I have him projected for. Just in front of me here. Yeah, I have him for 4 touchdowns, which isn't crazy, but I think he very well could be just right under that 1,000 yards, that 966 kind of yardage if he stays again healthy for that season. So where I'm going to look at average draft position, and I use Fantasy Football Calculator for that. In the 7th round, both of these guys are going in the mid-7th round, and I'm going to decide. So this is kind of a dead zone for wide receivers. Jarvis Landry is right after them, and assuming Jarvis Landry's health is pretty good to start the season, I will take Landry over these guys. Julian Edelman is a guy that people seem to not really be sure what to do with. I do like Edelman. At least we know he's going to be healthy. We're not sure the relationship with Cam Newton, but I do think that Edelman easily provides a much safer floor. Edelman's been the epitome of consistency with Tom Brady over the years, so I do believe he's going to be a go-to guy. He's going to be that veteran, that leader in that locker room for that wide receiving core. Sure, we like N'Keal Harry, but again, reports come out that he's a little bit banged up. He's not separating early in training camp, so I think Julian Edelman will still be that go-to guy. Consistency, floor, I take Julian Edelman. And then Deebo Samuel, they say he could be ready to start the season. Or actually, you know what they're saying? He's probably going to miss a couple games. Is actually the most recent report. So Deebo's a guy that you might have to be without for at least the first, I would say, 2 to 4 games in the season. Those are really important to get into the playoffs. Like, you need to win all your, it doesn't matter. You need to win all your games. So I would pass on Deebo. I would take Deebo a little bit later. But guys like McCole Hardman, Christian Kirk I like over probably right around those Houston wide receivers. I really like the outlook on him. Mecole Hardman is going to be a guy that's very inconsistent, but he doesn't have those injury concerns. It's going to be hard to know when to trust him. So for the most part, I'm taking Fuller over Brandon Cooks, but I'm taking some of those later guys, those veterans, ahead of them even more. So if they keep falling, if people are scared off of those guys, you're looking at in the 8th round, then I'm willing to take a chance on them, especially if you had a lot of safe guys in early rounds. They both could be league winners. Like I said, Will Fuller could be that absolute league winner that if he's healthy and they have a chemistry with DeShaun Watson and it's a plus matchup, if, then he's the guy that has the better chance of being that league winning, the championship wide receiver. And that's the one I would go with. So that's it for me, guys. I hope you had a lot of fun listening to my process here. Follow us at snap_fantasy on Twitter and Instagram. My personal account is LandoFF. So get at me anywhere you can, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.